Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name's Eugene Yeh. I lead the growth team within Android Enterprise. That's basically everyone who's out in the field helping partners and customers like yourselves be successful with Android in the enterprise space. With me today is Nisha Sharma, who's with Accenture, and we're here to talk to you a little bit about how Android Enterprise is disrupting the enterprise space with mobility. There's always a good and bad about being in the latter half of a conference. The bad part, obviously, is you've sort of absorbed a lot of this information, and you want to be in the front because you have a lot of energy when you're coming into the conference and you're taking a lot of notes, and then you get to the back half, you're like, oh, overloaded. But the good news is, honestly, as you're now processing all the things you've heard about for the last 2 or 3 days and incorporating that into what you're supposed to be doing back at the office, you're now realizing, oh, I got to go back, and how am I supposed to use all these things in the priorities that I had set just like 2 months ago at the beginning of the year? And this is really good context for us to talk about Android Enterprise, because a lot of folks are thinking about mobility not as a standalone thing, but in the context of what you're trying to do more broadly within your business. And not surprisingly, when we go and talk to organizations, a lot of organizations are well on their way of deploying what they would term as like digital transformation technologies. However, when you think about that more broadly in the context of the capabilities of the organization, you begin to run into a lot of problems. And I know when you hear about more broadly within the conference, a lot of that are kind of on-premise technologies versus cloud and things like that. But even more core to this is the ability to deliver a lot of these capabilities through mobility. And when you think about the fact that 41% of the organizations don't have wall-to-wall mobility, that's kind of a problem, right? When you think about IoT, when you think about the new things from analytics, the ability to have that knowledge at the edge of your workforce and with your customers is incredibly important. The idea that you have to manage supply chain, that you have to manage intelligence without having an endpoint out there of some type from a mobility perspective makes it very difficult for you to both build applications and be successful in your business. Because at this point, mobility or even web technologies, they're just a thin veneer to your business. They are the interface for both your customers and your employees to access all the capabilities that you've been building within your organization. Mobility is actually how people take action. It's how people will then leverage those capabilities you've built. You've built on GCP, you've built on your on-premise technologies. All of these things are capabilities that you need an actual device to then get access to. And so an example of this is smart manufacturing, or more broadly speaking, just distribution channels. This affects retail customers, this affects manufacturing customers, it affects all the folks in industrial. An example specifically for us, Marks & Spencer is a customer of ours that faces this challenge as well, in that you have to manage your supply chain, as I talked about before, but if your folks in the field, your task workers, your people who are out actually in the distribution centers don't have a mobile device as part of your platform, you have a challenge, right? If they can't scan the barcode, if you can't get real-time inventory information, you have difficulty. And people are trying to find ways around this with RFID and other capabilities with sensors, but ultimately you have to have your workers be enabled. So the question then becomes, why haven't we done this before? Everyone kind of intuitively understands that in order for me to be effective, I need a very mobile workforce, and I need everyone in my organization to be mobile capable. However, what ends up happening is you select a subset of your organization to have these capabilities. You say, oh, the folks at headquarters, the knowledge workers, the C-level folks, these are the people who really, really need to have this. And what ends up happening is you have this isolated group that has mobile capabilities, but when they try to take action against it, you're limited in your tool set. You don't have the ability to actually communicate this to the people who are doing the work, who are out in the field, and you end up in a situation where you're challenged. And so it's not like people don't want to do this. They're limited. And you think about why. We think quite a bit about why. Why hasn't this proliferated? And the answers aren't surprising, right? It's security, it's manageability, it's cost. These are all the reasons why, as much as I'd love to have the person who's checking the meter out in the field have this technology, wow, I don't really have a good scalable way by which to manage this. So we spend a ton of energy here at Google trying to help think through that so that you don't have this challenge and you actually have the tools necessary to leverage the capabilities that you've heard about for the last few days. And this is a conversation that you hear about quite a bit with almost any enterprise software, right? You think about the constituents within your organization that you need to get over the line in order to actually be successful. There's IT, there's your line of business, and there's your employee. I think it varies depending on the type of technology you're talking about, the level of control, the level of desire of each organization to push forward that technology. But these are all incredibly important constituents. And historically, a lot of folks have thought about this as the tug of war, right? And I have to make this trade-off. I'll give you a very specific example. Security. So IT obviously wants an incredibly locked down environment because they don't want any data leakage, they don't want any compromise within that ecosystem. However, the end user doesn't want that lockdown. I personally have had this experience. I'm sure some of you have as well. You get a device, it is so incredibly locked down that you can't actually use it. You shove it in your drawer, and then you actually have shadow IT. Right? You have a problem where people are bringing their own device in, their own services, and they circumvent that control that you thought was so fantastic. So beyond that, when you think even beyond that to the line of business, you think about the person who's leading marketing, the person who's leading distribution and supply chain, someone who actually then has to manage that. If that organization is so locked down and their employees aren't using that mobile device, their application actually isn't successful. Right? If you have a very concrete example, if you have Salesforce and nobody is updating it because the only way you can access it is this purpose-built device that no one wants to use, that tool isn't actually useful for you. So what we think about then is how do I help security be top of mind, but yet allow the end user and line of business the flexibility to leverage that platform. So when we think about that, we came up with the work profile. So rather than have a very binary choice as to lock down your device or not, we partitioned the device into a work set of applications and experiences, and then you have a personal set of experiences. And what that allows you to do then is rather than have two separate devices of which maybe I have work applications on my personal device and personal applications on my work device, or I don't use the work device at all, I'm now in a situation where I have this one device where I have comfort in knowing that IT is not monitoring my personal use, and yet I have a very secure container within the phone that IT is very comfortable then deploying very specific work applications that don't bleed data back and forth between the two profiles. So that is an example that when we fundamentally think bottoms up at Google of how to solve the problem of proliferating mobility throughout your enterprise, we actually designed the solution to meet that need versus trying to work our way back from a feature set. So this applies across all the needs that when we think about an IT organization trying to think through security and management, and we think about employees thinking about privacy and well-being, and we think about lines of business that actually want to ensure that they have a platform under which they can be successful with their transformation, we focus on all of these things. And in order for us to do that, we think both about the ecosystem as well as the things that Google controls. So the ecosystem for Google, we're very much about an open ecosystem, consistent from Android Enterprise to all the technologies that you've heard about over the past week. However, we understand that there are minimum needs that we need consistency around in order to ensure that the base level concerns that the enterprise has are met. And so we think through Google Play, we think through hardware, we think through the operating system, and the ecosystem can customize around that, but there are very core components that don't compromise security when you try to deploy this within the enterprise. What this allows us to do is you now have security, you now have a flexible platform, but you also have a variety of form factors to, again, think through all of the needs of your organization. If you're trying to deploy mobility across your organization, if you think you have a mining platform out in the Bering Sea, you can't use a very high cost device that's very fragile. It just doesn't work. However, you want that to be part of your platform when you have knowledge workers in your organization. You don't want to have islands of devices that you're managing separately. So when we think about the platform and the ability to go end-to-end from smartphones and knowledge workers out to signage, a point-of-sale system, out to virtual reality, that allows an organization to actually deploy once, think through the entire platform, and actually build on top of it. And we've then, when you have that, we're able to unlock a lot of the tools that you've been hearing about again in the past week. You now are able to leverage ML. You're now able to leverage development tools that allow you to cross operating systems. These are all things that we want to ensure your ability to do because we know you have a very diverse set of needs, and it's not just about one tool, one device, one platform. We also think through this to ensure that we want you to have a very seamless experience when you deploy this. Even though we have minimum consistency from a security perspective, we also want to ensure that when you're going out and going into the ecosystem to procure the devices, to procure services, we want to make sure that you feel comfortable that they actually understand Android Enterprise and can help you be successful. So we developed a program called Android Enterprise Recommended that begins to span that value chain. You now know when you go purchase a device, it's recommended, it's certified by Google. You now know that when you go into an EMM or a UEM, we've also certified that as well. So all the controls and security that we talk about are now leverageable by you as an organization through these tools that we've reviewed and partner with quite closely within the ecosystem. So now when you purchase and you try to think through an end-to-end solution, you now have certification across the entire ecosystem so that you don't have to worry about validating that within your own organization. So with that, I want to introduce Nisha. She's thought through a lot of these situations in her experience with Accenture. What we've talked about quite a bit now are things that have been happening in the recent past as well as what people are going through today. Obviously, in her role at Accenture, she now is able to think through things even beyond that. Think through things, what happens in a world when you go beyond just having mobility and you go beyond just cloud computing? How does this actually transform the business and the world that we live in? We want to be sure that you actually have an understanding of that so you can contextualize the broad as well as the near term. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eugene.
Yep.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nisha Sharma. I'm a managing director at Accenture Digital. I've actually been at Accenture for about 20 years now, and about 15 of those years have been in the enterprise mobility space. So the very early days of mobile, which I'm sure many of you can remember. So it's been quite fascinating to see how mobility has changed over the course of this time. And what I wanted to do was spend some time talking to you about what's next, right? What are the trends that we are seeing within technology, within our solutions, and the kind of work that we're doing with our clients now. So every year, Accenture releases our technology vision. We just released our most recent 2019 Tech Vision in February. And the Tech Vision talks about, again, like what are some of the trends that we are seeing in the business, not just technology trends, but trends that are impacting, the kind of work that our clients are doing. And so I thought I'd spend a little bit of time sharing that with you so you can understand where mobility fits, where Android fits, and the kinds of things that we are doing in this space. Because it's changing quite quickly, and you'll see that. So just to kind of set the stage, I mean, the digital era technology that we've been talking about all this time, it's expected now from every business, right? In fact, in 2018, companies spent $1.1 trillion on digital transformation projects. And 94% of organizations say that they're doing digital transformation work already, right? So, it's just expected. So what's next, right? If everybody's doing this, what are the next types of things that we're working on? And we call this now the post-digital era, right? And again, the digital technologies, it doesn't mean that digital is over. It's certainly not the case. It just means that digital is just expected to be there. It's the price of admission, right? We don't say anymore, we don't ask, well, if you have a mobile phone, then do this, right? It's just on your mobile phone, do this, right? So it's just assumed that you have this. So we're starting to see a new set of characteristics that are defining what this post-digital era looks like. And some of those things are around individualization, as an example. It's about knowing what our users want, right? Not just, it's not just personalization, but it's almost hyper-personalization. It's knowing, it's not just, okay, I know you like these things, or you kind of, done things around this, but it's really understanding what you want and what you need. It's also around instant on-demand, right? So yeah, okay, we know what you want, but you want it now, right? You need it now. So how do we get these services to you in that way? We also talk about momentary markets, how it's almost like this pop-up-like environment. And I'll give you this example of some work that we've been doing with Carnival Cruise Lines. They they're transforming the entire ship experience, right? And I don't know if anybody's been on a recent Carnival Cruise experience, but what they're doing now is everybody gets a medallion, they call it. It's a wearable device. So this medallion knows, it knows your preferences, it knows where you are on the ship, it knows what you're doing, right, and all of that. And it allows you to buy things, right? It's like that. And in addition to that, they've got sensors all around the ship. The cruise employees all have, mobile devices with them, and they've got all this analytics and everything just all around the ship. So the idea is that if let's say there's an attraction, like a show or something, and they realize that based on everything that they know, that there's an upcoming attraction that perhaps your child might be interested in going, and that that they want to go to. So now they can just send you a message saying, hey, I've reserved a spot for you. Would you like to attend this, right? Or would you like to purchase this ticket to go? Right, and it gives you that opportunity. So it's very momentary, right? It's just, hey, you weren't planning this, but this opportunity came up. I'd like you to give you the opportunity to buy this, and then it's done, right? So that's what we mean by momentary markets. And the other characteristic is around trust and responsibility. We're just expecting trust, from all of our providers, right? So much data is being collected and being available about us. Right, and so it's just expected that in this new world that companies are treating our data responsibly and and kind of keeping to and making sure that we understand also how they're using it. Right, so what I want to do is take a look at some of the trends that are in the tech vision. Now there are 5 trends that we talk about overall, but I'd like to really focus on 3 of them because I think they are most impacting the space around enterprise mobility, right? And it'll show you what's happening in the enterprise world. Some of the other trends are more around the consumer experience and what we're seeing in the consumer world. But I thought I'd start with the enterprise side. So the first trend is called dark power, dark with a Q. And we'll go through each of these, but it's distributed ledgers, artificial intelligence, extended reality, and quantum computing. These are basically the new wave of technologies that we're seeing our clients use now, right? So the D is for distributed ledgers, right? We're using technologies like blockchain and cryptocurrencies and these types of things. We're using them in our supply chains to have end-to-end trusted transactions and such. We have car makers who are using blockchain type technologies to protect cars from hackers. We have delivery companies like DHL, for example, who are using blockchain to ensure that perhaps some medication that you ordered is the correct medication and it's not counterfeit, and we're following it along the way. So we're seeing the uses of those types of technologies. The A is for artificial intelligence. I'm sure you've seen so many examples of some really cool artificial intelligence and machine learning types of implementations, even here at Next. In fact, we have at our booth we have the robot. If you've seen the robotic arm that is taking petri dishes and putting them under a camera for analysis, and is using image recognition to check the quality of those samples. And then it's got the new IoT Edge TPU incorporated in that to accelerate that kind of processing. But so there's a lot that's happening in the AI space around image recognition, natural language processing, and so on and so on. In fact, I think 67% of businesses say that they're already exploring artificial intelligence in some ways today. The R is for extended reality, XR. That's augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed realities, assisted reality, so on and so on. And this is all about new experiences. It's about new ways of training, right? We're now providing our workers with, headsets that allow them to, virtualize environments so that they can train and learn in those places. As an example, new ways of shopping. I'm sure you've seen, right? I mean, you take your phone and you can augment some, product that's out there, or be able to interact with some product perhaps in a virtual way. New ways of exploring places, right, for education and so on. Just to be able to virtually see a national park or a museum or someplace like that. Then the Q is for quantum computing. It seems like quantum computing is far out, but we actually are working with some of our clients now to explore how quantum computing can be used to solve some difficult problems that they perhaps weren't able to solve before. We worked with a company called 1Qubit, if you're familiar with them, but we mapped out over 150 different use cases for quantum computing, things like drug discovery or route optimization or fraud detection and those types of scenarios. So, individually, these are definitely opportunities for differentiation in this new world. And then when you put them together, you really, really start to see some new and even unimagined, possibilities around, what we can do in the future. So, we talked about the future, but these are not way out future trends, right? These are actually already happening now. 89% of businesses say that they're already experimenting with one or more of these types of dark technologies. And businesses are expecting big impacts from these technologies. Just as an example, 41% of executives rank AI as the technology that they expect to have the most impact in their organization over the next 3 years. So people are doing this, and it's happening now. But again, like I said, it doesn't mean that everything we've done with the digital technologies is done. In fact, we're expecting that those are the foundation for these new technologies. So we talk about here this move from SMAC to dark. You all heard of SMAC, right, as social, mobile, analytics, and cloud technologies. And up until now, right, that's the kind of work we had been doing. We had been using social media technologies. We've been rolling out mobile devices, maybe not those 41% of companies that you mentioned, Eugene, but companies really are using these both in the consumer space, but also in the enterprise space, and then cloud and analytics. And it just as an example, right? As we move to these dark technologies, mobile is just it's the front end, it's the channel that people will be using. It's just expected to be there, and we'll talk about that as well. Again, just another example that 92% of companies there say that their SMAC technologies are still considered to be a competitive differentiation, but we are moving past that and establishing that as a foundation, and it's only going to allow us to take our businesses in the future. And the whole idea really is that if you're not doing these, if you haven't already done the SMAC technologies, it's going to be harder for you to keep up, right? Especially as we're moving very, very quickly into the future. As we all know, the pace of innovation, the pace of technology changes is just continuing to accelerate all the time. So just using the mobility example here, right? So we talked about XR, extended reality, and this example is just showing that virtual reality and augmented reality solutions are all built on mobile devices, right? You need a mobile device, you need the network communication, you need to have applications that are built to support this, and they're all running on mobile devices, just as an example. So the next trend I want to talk about is what we call human plus. So again, talking about what is impacting our enterprises, well, this is about our workforce. And what we're saying is that 90% of jobs that we currently have today, we know that they're going to change as a result of AI, robotics, and other such technologies, right? So jobs are changing fast. And what we're seeing is that, what we know is that individuals as workers, right, we of course come with our skills and with our knowledge, but we are also becoming human plus in that we are, enabled even further by technology that our companies are providing to us to do our work, right? And as and I'll show you a couple of examples of that, but the point is that as this workforce evolves, our companies need to keep up with that and be able to provide the employees with the tools that they want and need in order to do their jobs. So a couple of examples here that I'll just to highlight. We have an oil and gas company whose workers right now have mobile devices and mobile technologies to help them troubleshoot issues that are a mile underground with these new game-like visualization tools that have been developed for them to do that troubleshooting. Right? We have factories where humans and robots are working side by side in the factories to do the work, and we have AI tools that are helping to identify which types of jobs should be done by which types of workers. We have workers who are being trained as drone delivery pilots, right? These are jobs that never existed before. But again, they would be able to use the technology and the applications and such that their workers have, that their employers have given them to be able to work with these drones and analyze what's coming from them and be able to, to support the work in those ways. But when it comes to what companies need to be thinking about in order to support their workers, we're really looking at 3 areas, and these are around hiring, training, and knowledge management. So if you think about it from hiring, right, when it comes to these changing jobs, this changing workforce, it's getting harder and harder to find the people who have these skills already, right? And so, and so companies are shifting the way that they normally, that the normal approaches that they would use to hire people. So they're moving away from these more kind of reactive skills-based hiring approaches, right? Not just, okay, putting out a job description that says, I need someone who has, 3 years of accounting experience, right? They're not looking at it that way anymore. Now, as an example, Unilever, one of the things that they're doing is they're actually screening candidates with a series of games. So imagine they've got, these apps and such that have these games on them, and they're assessing their memory. They're assessing their acceptance of risk. They're looking at whether they're more likely to read contextual or emotional cues, right? So they're trying to understand how you work rather than what you know. And then they're using AI tools to review those results and match these candidates with open jobs, right? So again, another example of, we're providing applications on mobile devices to allow the employers to do these sorts of assessments. On the training side, again, companies can't hire fast enough in terms of the kinds of jobs that we need skills for. And so there's a need to invest in reskilling and providing on-demand training opportunities for our existing workforce. Right, the survey says that 43% of businesses say that 60% of their workforce will move into new roles over the next 3 years. So how do we provide our workers with the training that they need? And this is, again, being done with mobile because they're on the go, they're just moving, and we're really finding new ways of providing training options to our employees. And the third area is around knowledge management. So we have more information available to us than we ever have before, but it's harder and harder to find and access this information, right? Because people are moving around quickly and it's just hard to capture. So we're using new technologies like natural language processing as a way to capture this information and be able to access it. We're looking at things like indexing unstructured data, unstructured documents, such as like an incident report or something like that, so we can, find the information we need there. We're looking at knowledge graphs to be able to search a wide variety of data sources, right? And so, again, we're looking at really changing our tools that we've been using for so long to be able to use them in new ways. So I think another point as well, I think when it comes to hiring and training, one of the things that businesses are also looking at is the new generation of workers, right, that are coming into the workforce. They're being forced to look at what are the tools and technologies that they're already using in the world, right? And recognizing, in our world today, the majority of people have Android devices, right? And so companies are looking at, okay, well, let's take advantage of that. Let's build on these Android experiences and the Android devices that they have to be able to, to provide them with the same types of experiences that they're used to. Or even tools like G Suite, right? Where, I'm sure you've seen that in schools and colleges, students are using G Suite. So how do we build these new tools and capabilities on things that they already know and they're comfortable with and they like, rather than thinking of, oh, what are those kind of, the old school kind of more traditional tools. They really have to think about these in new ways. So the third trend that I wanted to talk about is secure us to secure me. This is all about security. And the point here is that security is no longer just about protecting oneself. It's about protecting everyone, right? And we can't, as a business, right, it still typically sees cybersecurity as an individual effort, meaning that, if I secure my own systems, if I secure my own, data, then I'll be safe. But that's really not the case, because as businesses, we are part of a broader ecosystem now of technology partners that we're working with. And every technology, every solution, every application, no matter where it's coming from, can be exposed to vulnerabilities in some way, right? And so you can't just assume that, okay, well, you guys have it covered, or you have to work together in this new world to do that. In fact, the survey point there says that only 29% of executives actually know that their ecosystem partners are working just as diligently as they would expect to in regards to security. We're seeing new types of risks or coming up in new ways, right? So around the whole misuse of data, normally we think that if someone gets unauthorized access to my data, well, then they're going to use that to exploit something in my system. But in reality, what's happening is you can find this data, you can find data in some other system, right, that's totally unrelated to you, but use it somehow to, to infiltrate or get into your own systems, right? So these, the attackers are really now seeing this ecosystem as an ever-widening attack surface. Another example is around aggregated data. We think of aggregated data as being somewhat anonymized, or can't necessarily tell who, identify individuals or something like that. But we've seen cases where there was an example of some aggregated data that was found on Strava and then used out of context to identify some secret US military sites, right? So, in today's connected and ecosystem world, the impact of cyber attacks is just being exponentially amplified. And if you might remember the WannaCry crypto worm that happened, right? That was where someone exposed an operating system vulnerability and attacked 300,000 computers over 150 countries in just a few days, right? And that brought down all sorts of businesses and impacted our work, tremendously, right? There was the Mirai malware, right? That it hijacked 100,000 IoT devices. And then they use that to launch an attack on a domain registration services provider, right? So, there's these downstream impacts and all sorts of, impacts that we have as a result of us being in this world. And, what I think businesses are realizing is that as they collaborate with their ecosystem partners on new services and new products and new experiences, they also really need to be collaborating on security as well. And there's no doubt that Google with Android and Google Cloud are a part of this, right? Because we all, the foundation of a lot of what we do is on our mobile device, right? And as employees, as consumers, like we don't necessarily know exactly where something went wrong, right? We just, it's like, oh, something happened on my phone, and people will just think of, okay, it's an Android problem or whatever. But that's why Google and the Android enterprise team have been doing so much to try to protect the experience on the phones, not just, I have to protect my piece here, but recognize their role in this ecosystem and in the solutions that we're providing to everyone, and doing what they can to protect us, right? Again, to protect everyone, not just as individuals. So, so I think these are just some of the trends that I wanted to highlight for you to give you a glimpse of what's happening out there as you think about the future and how we can continue to use mobile, and how it is such a foundation for what we are doing. These are the other trends here. If you want to learn more, you can visit our site, accenture.com/technologyvision. Yeah, hopefully that helps. So, Eugene?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.